Robert Durst was born in 1943 into one of New York's wealthiest and most prominent real estate families. As the eldest son of Seymour Durst, Robert grew up with extreme privilege, wanting for nothing. However, behind the mansions and limousines was a turbulent family life and a son who, even from a young age, seemed troubled. As a child, Robert showed signs of volatility and anger issues. He was a misfit, preferring the company of the family's servants over other children. By his teenage years, his behavior became even more alarming. He developed cruel habits like amputating frogs limb by limb, keeping the torsos alive for days by feeding them. His anger fixated on family pets in particular, a pack of Malamutes all named Igor. According to his brother Douglas, over a 6-month period, Robert went through 7 Igor dogs, each one mysteriously dying. It was almost as if he was practicing on them. In 1965, Robert graduated from Lehigh University with an economics degree and headed west to UCLA for graduate studies. It was there that he met Susan Berman, a vivacious young woman whose larger-than-life persona appealed to him. Her father was Davy the Jew Berman, an infamous mobster in Las Vegas with deep connections to the mafia underworld. Despite their vastly different backgrounds, Robert and Susan formed a close friendship that would span over 3 decades. After UCLA, a directionless Robert returned to New York in 1973 and married a young dental hygienist named Kathleen McCormick. She came from a modest, working-class Long Island family, the polar opposite of the opulent Dursts. The unlikely pairing surprised both families, who whispered that perhaps Kathleen was an opportunist, marrying into money and prestige. Behind closed doors, signs of strain in the marriage surfaced within a few years. Robert became possessive, controlling, and by some accounts, physically abusive. He resented Kathleen continuing her education and pursuing her dreams of becoming a doctor. As she immersed herself in medical school, spending long hours studying, her independence enraged her husband. By 1982, after 9 years together, Kathleen confided to close friends that she was afraid of what Robert might do to her. On the night of January 31st, 1982, Kathleen attended a dinner party at her friend's house in Connecticut, while Robert stayed home. According to Durst, once the weekend was over, he drove Kathleen to catch the 9:17 p.m. train back to Manhattan, where she attended medical school. That was the last confirmed sighting of Kathleen Durst. Her friends and professors waited in vain for her to show up at the hospital for rounds. 5 days later, an aloof Robert Durst finally got around to filing a missing persons report on his wife. Right from the start, Durst's version of events raised suspicion. The timing, the delays, inconsistent statements, none of it sat right with detectives. They also learned about Durst's abusive behavior towards his wife and their volatile marriage on the brink of divorce. However, with no body or no witnesses, the investigation soon went cold for lack of evidence, making things more complicated. The day after Kathleen supposedly returned to the city, someone claiming to be her called the medical school, saying she was too sick with cramps and diarrhea to come in. It was a call Kathleen would have never made, according to her friends. So, who made it? Many came to believe it was Susan Berman impersonating Kathleen as part of an alibi ruse to cover for Robert. In the subsequent media coverage surrounding his wife's baffling disappearance, Robert Durst kept a low profile, while Susan Berman willfully stepped into the spotlight as his spokesperson. She vigorously defended him to reporters, offering seemingly inside information about Robert's innocence and details about his marriage. Behind the scenes, detectives reopened the investigation into Kathleen Durst's disappearance in 1999. Westchester District Attorney Janine Pirro jumped on the case, re-interviewing witnesses and breathing new life into the cold case file. Robert Durst felt the walls closing in, with police poking around and digging deeper into the past. As the case generated fresh media buzz in New York circles, An anxious Durst decided it was time to disappear for a while. In late 2000, Robert Durst surfaced in Galveston, Texas, disguised as a mute woman named Dorothy Sinner, renting a rundown boarding room for $300 a month under his new alias. The millionaire hid out from detectives 1,200 miles away, still chasing leads on his missing wife. Eccentric and unassuming, Dorothy hung out at the local library, post office, and neighborhood bars, keeping to herself while never quite fitting in. Across the hall dwelled another social outcast named Morris Black, a gruff drifter plagued by health issues. Despite little in common, he and Robert struck up a casual friendship. When Durst revealed himself as a man and a millionaire one night over drinks, a disbelieving Black just laughed it off. On Christmas Eve, while Dorothy made the rounds at Galveston's seedy watering holes, Hollywood was thousands of miles away, grieving the loss of Susan Berman. She was found dead in her Benedict Canyon home, a bullet hole in the back of her head, likely dead for days before anyone discovered her body. The timing was highly suspicious given her deep ties to Robert Durst and the renewed interest in his missing wife. An odd letter postmarked December 23, 2000 further complicated matters. One envelope containing Susan's address and the misspelled location Beverly Hills arrived at the Beverly Hills PD, along with an anonymous note inside containing only one word: cadaver. It didn't take detectives long to connect the dots. Whoever sent the letter appeared to be tipping off the cops as to a corpse at the Berman's address. Given the history between Durst and Berman, plus her apparent role providing his fake alibi, investigators considered him a prime suspect in Berman's murder. However, Durst had fled New York, and his whereabouts were unknown. It wasn't until the dismembered remains of Morris Black were discovered in Galveston months later that police finally caught up with Durst, hiding out under the alias Dorothy Sinner. With Durst now in custody, investigators hoped they could uncover new incriminating evidence tying him to Berman's death back in Los Angeles. Throughout 2001, the reclusive millionaire drew tighter into his inner circle of misfit acquaintances, including Morris Black. Their unlikely friendship took a dark turn that September inside the drab boarding house. Inexplicably, perhaps motivated by extortion, jealousy, or simply his deteriorating mental state, Morris Black confronted Robert Durst with a gun inside his apartment. Durst managed to overpower, then shoot Black in the head during the struggle. After years spent evading the law, Durst shockingly decided to dismember Black's body himself, tossing the body parts into Galveston Bay. Only the severed head remained missing. Police arrived on the scene to a horrific sight: the apartment of Robert Durst soaked in blood and flesh, walls covered in gore. It didn't take long for the investigation to point squarely at Durst, who quickly confessed while claiming self-defense, all the way up through his murder trial in 2003. Against all odds, his legal dream team successfully convinced a Texas jury that Black pulled the gun first. Although Durst admitted to the gruesome aftermath, jurors felt prosecutors failed to disprove his version of self-defense. Once acquitted of murder, he pled guilty to lesser charges, serving a short prison stint before returning to the obscurity of high society living. You would think for most people accused of murder and dismemberment, that saga alone would be enough excitement for one lifetime, but not Robert Durst. In 2010, after decades avoiding media scrutiny, he willingly stepped into the spotlight in an HBO documentary entitled The Jinx. Durst granted unprecedented access to filmmaker Andrew Jarecki, sitting for over 20 hours of interviews spanning years of production, divulging secrets even his closest confidants never heard. Durst came dangerously close to self-incrimination, playing a cat-and-mouse game with his own dark past. Following weeks, building anticipation towards the 2015 finale, Durst was caught in a bathroom mic mishap, uttering a shocking soliloquy to himself off camera.
I'm having difficulty with the question. What the hell did worse.
The next day, Durst was tracked down and arrested in New Orleans on a first-degree murder warrant filed by the LAPD for Susan Berman's death. Found inside his hotel room, a latex mask, cash, a gun, and a one-way ticket to Cuba. After years of circumventing convictions, something in the HBO production finally provided the missing link. Following his arrest, further analysis. During the filming of The Jinx, Susan Berman's stepson had uncovered a 1999 letter written by Durst to Berman that contained the same misspelling of Beverly Hills as the cadaver envelope that tipped off police to her murder. While reviewing case files on the investigation with the filmmakers, Durst described the identical typo unique to both his handwriting and the cadaver note without realizing the connection. This unintended confession, caught on tape years after the crime, appeared to implicate Durst. The filmmakers realized the significance of the evidence and delivered the 1999 letter to the LAPD. This new information led directly to Durst's indictment for Berman's murder. Convicted finally in 2021 of killing Susan Berman, a judge sentenced Durst to life in prison without parole. However, questions still remain. Unaddressed for decades while Durst occupied headlines, investigators in several states revisited cold cases, wondering just how many deaths Durst may be connected to. Several missing girls fit eerily similar profiles to that of his vanished wife, Kathleen. At one time or another, Durst resided in towns not far from where many unsolved female disappearances occurred. Pattern or coincidence? Law enforcement in Vermont, San Francisco, and Humboldt County followed up by seeking any possible links tying Durst to missing girls Lynn Scholes, Kristen Modafferi, or Karen Mitchell. In Vermont, police began investigating a possible connection between Durst and Lynn Scholes, an 18-year-old college student who went missing in 1971 after being seen shopping at a health food store Durst owned at the time. In San Francisco, a 2003 DA's office report attempted to link Durst to the 1997 disappearance of two teenage girls, noting that Durst frequently stayed at a homeless shelter where one of the missing teens had volunteered. Investigators in multiple jurisdictions were combing through cold case files, wondering how many tragic deaths Durst may have left in his wake across the country over his 4 decades of aiding justice. The tragic deaths of Karen in particular, as well as Susan, hauntingly parallel Kathleen's demise across multiple state lines over 10 years apart. Much like his childhood Malamutes Igor 1 through 7, the question remains whether Durst continued practicing his psychopathic hobby over 4 decades. Did Berman in Black represent merely the times he slipped up and got caught? Are there possibly other Igors that exist only as missing person files hidden in drawers across the country? Sadly, the dark secrets locking away proof of Durst's full, monstrous legacy will go with him to the grave. In 2022, at 78 years old, he took those answers permanently as he died alone behind bars before standing trial for the murder of his first wife, Kathleen. The wealthy, eccentric enigma maintained his innocence until the very end, despite an eerie trail of violence, tragedy, and mystery that plagued him wherever he wandered for over 40 years.